What's good, everybody? I can't believe it. We're at week 5 already of the college football season. My name's Bill. Find me on Discord. Put $1 in front of it. Welcome to the College Football Show. Like I said, we're in week 5. We're rolling right along. The season has gone way faster than I thought it would, but it's been a fun college football season so far, and it's about to get more fun. While you're here, look right below this video. It's going to say SHIPIT Nation. If it says subscribe, click it. And if it says subscribed, then you're already subscribed. But we're looking to get to 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. We're getting close. We're above 8,000, but with the viewership, we should be at 10K in no time. Just make sure that you're subscribed, and then you can get more videos like this. You can get myself. You get the Degenerate 75, Tambo, Hoop, all of the SHIPIT Nation cast, for all the sports. So make sure you're subscribed, and we're looking to maybe do something special when we get to 10,000 subscribers, and you're going to want to be a part of that. So thank you in advance for doing that. As far as this week in college football goes, the DraftKings contests are pretty typical. They're the same as they were last week. The big contest is $225,000 prize pool with $50K up top. I'll just tell you to look for the smaller 20 max, the single entries. Those have a much better payout. If you can afford the lottery, go for it. But the drop off from first place to 10th place is way more significant. You're going to get a better bang for your buck in those the high dollar single entries, the $4.20 max. But the one contest you do need to get in, also right down here in the description, is our SHIPIT Nation Listener League. No RAKE. It's the best contest out there on DraftKings. Again, the biggest no RAKE contest in college football on DraftKings today. $5 5 max, so $25. You're in. Last week, as you can see, there's a SHIPIT Nation badge at the top, TS Zone 72. But look, these are mine. I'm a cash guy, so I'm donating $25. There's 5 lineups you're almost guaranteed to beat right off the bat. So jump into it. We're looking to grow it as fast as possible. We're looking to show DraftKings that us college football DFS players are out there. So let's get it filled as fast as we can. We'd love to have you as part of our listener league community from week to week. But with all that, let's move on to the slate, not waste any time. Getting started with what appears to be a blowout, Kentucky at Ole Miss. The one thing I will say is this seems like it's going to be Mississippi's first big test. I know they played Wake, but what can you really say about Wake Forest? With Kentucky, they're just cheap, like Brock Vandegrift at 5K, maybe. Chip Trayanum is still going to be out, so it's going to be Sumo. And then Patterson and Wilcox maybe a little bit too. They are a little bit more of a run-heavy team, so that would be their route to get there. But, Barry and Brown, Dane Key has seen a bigger target share, and he just had a big game or a bigger game. So we could see him get a little bit of traction. These guys are just cheap more than they are anything else. The 17-point team total doesn't thrill me. The Ole Miss side is what we're going to be interested in. Yes, Jackson Dart's expensive, but he has blown up this year. Yes, Trey Harris is expensive, but he's getting 11 targets a game. He's getting 157 yards and a touchdown per game. So his upside is definitely there. Antoine Wells is a transfer in from Carolina, so he's much cheaper, still involved in the offense. Henry Parrish at running back, he's kind of finally got that workhorse role. I thought he should have been a workhorse at Miami. I'm not a coach, obviously, but Parrish is finally settling into that workhorse role, and at 6,800 just seems far too cheap for this game environment. It's a positive game script for the runners. You could easily see a situation where Dart, Harris, and Wells all connect to get him up, and then Parrish runs them home. I'm always a big fan of Caden Prescorn, big tight end for Ole Miss. Too cheap in my opinion. Probably should be 8 or 9K. But no, really, this Ole Miss team, we're going to really see what they are against Kentucky. We saw what Kentucky did against Georgia, so that's maybe the scariest part, but a perfect spot to play these Ole Miss guys for sure. One of the more interesting games is BYU and Baylor, and you'll realize when I get into it that this pricing seems a little bit off. Again, maybe not the greatest two teams in the Big 12, but BYU coming off a big win at Kansas State. Baylor is kind of settled in with their rotation now a little bit more, as much as we can think that they would. Retzlaff, 7,800, probably a fair price. He's fine. If you're game stacking, I don't mind it. If you're not, there's going to be other quarterbacks on this slate that I prefer, but he's not the worst option. Hinckley or Patty, Moa was the lead dog last game. Moa was a freshman who got a lot of run last game because LJ Martin's out. Rapati was out, but now he's back. And at 4,300, he's likely going to be a workhorse. The one risk would be as if, they saw something in Moa and they're like, oh, we need to split time with these running backs, but don't necessarily think that's the case. But it is going to be a little bit of a wait and see, but Rapati should be the lead dog in this back. And then Chase Roberts has been the target guy for BYU. Lassiter is the next man up. And then the rest is kind of just spread out. But these guys are cheap enough that you definitely consider them. And, looking at this game spread, it's not the highest total, but at the same time, all it takes is an extra field goal from one team and touchdown from another team, and we're getting close to the highest total on the slate. So it doesn't take much for this game. If it does shoot out, you could see some Baylor BYU stacks near the tops of these contests. Sawyer Robertson is kind of filling in. That should be Daquan Finn in the second spot, but he is hurt, so we don't know if he's going to play. Maybe this is the projection gods telling us Daquan Finn is not going to play. But Sawyer Robertson he's good. I mean, 5,500 for a guy who can run a little bit in a game where he's favored at home. You love seeing that price tag on him. Bryson Washington has been the number one back, kind of. It was Richardson last game. Reese and Pendergrass kind of round out. They do have a 4-back rotation, but Washington and Richardson are the top two guys. And if Richardson is going to be the flavor of the week again, like he was against Colorado, 3,100 is, it's an impossible price not to click him. There's just so much usage spread out, but these guys are so cheap that it makes sense. Monterey Baldwin is wide receiver 1. Where are you going to get a wide receiver 1 for 3,500? At 3,500, 3 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown, and you're there easy. So that's kind of what you have to consider when you're making your builds. Neither of these team totals are the most glamorous, but again, it wouldn't take much more scoring for this to be considered a shootout. And I could easily see this being a sneakier game where you're going to see some Baylor and BYU guys in those winning lineups. One that's a little more obvious is Oklahoma State and Kansas State. A couple of those teams, though, now, what are we going to get? For Oklahoma State, Bowman got benched last game for Rangel. I think he ended up needing to come back in, but he's going to start. We're not concerned about that. But Ollie Gordon's still 9,200. He still hasn't found his legs, and he still hasn't found the blockers in front of him, really. So that's going to be a tough price to play, especially we just talked about 3 running backs in the last game who are, one of them's a third of his price and could outscore him. So those are the kind of things that you have to really consider when you're looking at these guys. But Ollie only had 11 carries last week. Mekhi Hughes did get to Kansas State a little bit earlier this year, but they've been pretty good against the run. So this isn't the greatest spot on the road in a negative game script. Again, Ollie's Ollie. He could have his ceiling game at any time, and I think we know that. With the wide receiver core, if you want your 18 to 21 points, play Brennan Presley. He's got that floor. He's the nookie blankie for Alan Bowman. Stribling, Owens, you could tell me just as well as I could tell you which one of these guys is going to be. Was Stribling a couple of games ago, and then last week it was a little bit more Owens. The pattern every other game tells me it's going to be a Stribling game, but you can't possibly know that at all. And then the Kansas State side, they're in need of a bounce back. They got torched by BYU last week. But the one thing is there are a couple of big play stuff. There's a punt return touchdown. There's a defensive touchdown. It's hard to say Kansas State's a worse team than BYU. It was just that kind of a day, I think. So Giddens is going to be looking for a big bounce back. And Dylan Edwards' backup actually is interesting. He does get field time. He does get a little bit of the target share. There's been a lot of buzz about him, and he's back home. He transferred back from Colorado. So 6,000 is just a little bit too much to pay for an RB2 when Giddens is the clear workhorse, but maybe a guy to look at in some of the props if they have some out. It's just interesting. And then Avery Johnson, dual threat quarterback. 8K is probably too cheap, especially, comparatively speaking to some of these other quarterbacks on the slate that are more expensive than him. I like it. Jace Brown is the number 1 option. Keegan Johnson's number 2. These would just be price plays for me. Or if I'm stacking this game and I want to take a couple of wide receivers from this side, those would be the two. Dante Cephas, he's got 9 targets on the season, but only 1 catch. So he's not really found it yet, but he's a guy that, we've seen have success in the MAC and then at Penn State. So the potential's there, but it's just so inconsistent with this wide receiver core. You'd be throwing a dart at Brown or Johnson probably, and then moving on. But like Johnson and Giddens, you could consider for cash. It's really the run games here and the wide receivers for Oklahoma State that are my first targets. And then everybody else would be more of GPP play. Very stackable game, though, if you can get there. Another one that could be a sneakier stack is Maryland and Indiana. Indiana has been lights out this year, a complete wagon. You could argue they haven't played anybody. UCLA was their first conference game, and UCLA is maybe the worst team in the Big Ten. Purdue's going to give them a run for their money, I think. Maybe the next game we talk about, too, Minnesota. But they look good. And they're playing at home, so you're going to like that side with almost 30-point team total. On the Maryland side, though, Billy Edwards is always going to be high upside with his dual threat. Roman Hemby. So I historically despise Roman Hemby because this is a little bit of a timeshare, but I will say Charlotte got to Indiana on the ground game a little bit in Indiana's last game. So Hemby could do that. And this is the cheapest he's been all season. If you're going to play him, this might be the spot to do it in a game stack. I'm not suggesting it. Okay. I'm just saying it's the cheapest he's been. The matchup isn't the worst matchup. But it's still a little bit too much of a timeshare for me personally. We know what we're getting in the pass game is Ty Felton. He's a target machine up there with the tops in the country as far as target share. And then Caden Prather is just too cheap. He's the next man up, and he's scored the last couple of weeks. And really, with his target share, all you need is a few catches and a score for Prather too to get there. So you can stack Edwards with either one of those guys, throw Hemby into a few shares, and I don't hate it. The other side is a little bit tougher just because of how spread out it is. Curtis Rourke at 7,500 is one of the guys I'm looking at. But really, like Ellison has been the top back and Lawton's been number 2. But really, all 4 of these guys are now somewhat involved in this backfield. So that makes it a little bit tough, and they're priced fairly. Like these are good prices for these guys. They're competitive. So it's tough to pull the trigger on any of them. If you pick the right one, though, that's where you get your leverage. So if you want a piece of this offense, a 30-point is one of the highest team totals on the slate. It's got to come from somewhere. And if it's not coming from the passing game in this favorable matchup, it could be these runners. You could see 2 of these guys score 2 touchdowns, and that wouldn't be out of the question. But I think you'll get any of them at low ownership. The passing game, we haven't really seen an alpha emerge. It was Omar Cooper one game it was Surratt. Price and Cross both involved. Donovan McCulley was a stud last year. He just hasn't gotten his legs underneath him yet this year, and it could happen at any time. So again, it's spin the wheel. Any one of these 5 top guys could really get there. And then Zach Horton, tight end. So that's just why I wanted to show him. He just needs to be on the list at least. But yeah, this is a very stackable game. And again, one bounce one way, and it's a 3-point spread instead of a 7-point spread. So this game could easily shoot out, especially if Maryland brings their A game. And they can score in a hurry, especially with those 2 wide receivers. So yeah, definitely a game you want to consider. One that you probably don't want to consider. This game should take me about 30 seconds to get through. Max Brosmer, half the time he looks like a solid quarterback. Half the time it looks like he's an FCS quarterback still. Darius Taylor, I think still one of the best running backs in college football. Just a tough price to pay when you're at the big house, especially in this game script. Daniel Jackson still has the upside just because of target share and his big playability. But quite honestly, Michigan could just put Will Johnson on him and call it a day. So I'm not in love with anything. Anything on this Minnesota side would be a dart throw. On the Michigan side, if anybody watched the Floyd Rosedale game last week, they saw Caleb Johnson just annihilate Minnesota on the ground in the second half. So you could easily see one of these running backs getting there. Mullings has really come out as the alpha of the group. Edwards is more experienced. Mullings is the better running back. I think it's been that way all year, and DK finally priced it that way. Alex Orji is still going to be interesting in this new triple option offense. that they are committed to. I guess it's not terribly new, but now they're more committed to it. So, his upside's there at 6K. And then these wide receivers, if Loveland is back, it just seems like he's too expensive for this style of offense that they're going to run. I mean, the passes are probably going to be dip and dunk for the most part. So that's why, you look at a tight end, you look at a slot guy or somebody like Morgan who works in the backfield a little bit more, but there's not really a whole lot to love with this wide receiver core. This is just going to be kind of a sloggy game. I think, if Michigan gets out to an early lead, we could easily see a 14-3 final score. Not really a game that I'm looking at for much at all. A game that I'm going to be looking at a lot more in the Big Ten, this Nebraska-Purdue game is very interesting. Dowdle has emerged as running back 1 for Nebraska. So he's probably too cheap for his role. I mean, these other guys are all still there, both the Johnsons and Gabe Ervin. Gabe Ervin kind of disappeared a little bit, but Johnson squared behind Dowdle. They're still on the field, but Dowdle seems to be the guy that they're favoring in that backfield. Raiola is probably too cheap. This is his first road game, and Purdue's maybe the worst team in the Big Ten, potentially the worst Power 5 team. No, they're coming later in the slate. Never mind. Sorry, Purdue. Apologize to all Purdue fans. We'll get to Mississippi State later, but maybe the worst in the Big Ten, Purdue. But they're not complete slouches. So that is one thing. Road games in the Big Ten are always going to be tough, but at 6,400. Raiola has the upside to get there. He's going to be probably in my cash pool. You got to look at him. And then this wide receiver core, Nair is wide receiver 1. But if you look at the prices of these other guys, Jamal Banks had a big game last week, and he's only 3,900. He's wide receiver 2. I think at the beginning of the season, he was the most expensive player on the slate for Nebraska, for everybody. He was like 7,500, and most expensive wide receiver for sure. Maybe not on the slate, but definitely wide receiver. And now he's sub 4K. So, and now his production is starting to come. And then you got guys like Jalen Lloyd, who are seeing an increased snap share. He can really take the top off at any time. We were discussing in our meeting earlier that Jalen Lloyd's a guy who is going to have a 70-yard touchdown at some point. It's just picking the right time to play him. So yeah, like these guys are just too cheap. First choice is probably Banks though, like at that price, and we know he's going to be on the field. Not quite wide receiver 1 yet, but could put up wide receiver 1 numbers at that price. And then the other side is definitely price plays again. Hudson Card in a game script where they're probably going to need to throw. I don't mind him at 5,100. Maccabee 4,300. We know he has the upside. We haven't seen it as much this year, but it's there. And the potential is there. And then Clary, the tight end, 3,900. Again, same story as Banks. Clary's a top target on the team though, because Edrine is out. So now it's Clary. He's the guy. And 3,900 is too low of a price for any wide receiver 1. I don't care how bad you are. Like even Air Force's guys, I think, are usually priced above 3,900. And then, the rest of these guys, since Edrine's out, we might see a little bit more Smith, might see a little bit more Rigby, but it's just the top guy at every position that I'm looking at for Purdue. And this is a stackable game too. I mean, again, if Purdue can keep it close in the first half and it's the offense keeping it close, there's no reason it can't get there. For Arkansas at Texas A&M, Arkansas is going to be interesting. I think they're priced right, but we know they play fast. So they're going to score. They do their best to run as many plays as possible to get those points. Taylor Green is dual threat. 7,600 is definitely still too cheap. He did look a little bit more human against Auburn last week. But quite frankly, if that's his floor, the 16 to 20 range is his floor, count me in at 7,600. Jaquin Jackson's been an absolute stud. And, the touchdown variance is going to come back at some point. You would think, maybe it won't. I mean, this could be a complete, absolute ceiling season for him. Now that Kyle Whittingham's not his coach. So always Jackson at 7,100. I don't mind. And Armstrong is a target monster at 7K. I don't mind. Again, it's just going to come down to roster construction with these guys because I think they're priced fairly. Tyrone Broden is on the field still, but he has a catch rate less than 30%. Even though he's getting the targets, he's not getting the receptions. And so Sategna has as many receptions as Broden does, even though he hasn't run as many routes. So if you're going to go for wide receiver 2, I might lean Sategna for that reason. But and then Doobie's out, so that'll help. Do nothing but help Jackson. And then on the Texas A&M side, Connor Weigman might be done for the season. I'm seeing rumors that he's just going to prepare for the NFL draft. Whether or not that has legs, who knows? But for this year, I don't know if it matters because Marcel Reed looks pretty good, and 7K is at that price might be my first click in my cash lineups. We'll wait and see how it shakes out, but early looks like a 7K Marcel Reed is everything that you want in cash, and you can play him in all formats. He's got the dual threat. And then Le'Veon Moss is a workhorse. 6K for him is a little bit tough. So that's, just comparatively speaking to the rest of the running backs on the slate. And if you want some of those high price guys, it might be a little bit tougher to go to the mid tier at running back. You might have to go, top tier quarterback, top tier wide receiver, and then value at the wide receiver position and value running back. I mean, it's really like basically my rambling is just telling you that you need to consider your roster construction. And 6K is probably a little bit too cheap for him, but in terms of the rest of the guys on the slate, it's kind of like the same story with Jackson. Fairly priced, maybe a little bit too cheap for both, but tough to click when there's more value out there. But again, we'll see. And then this wide receiver room, it has been Noah Thomas. His targets were up last game, but Jabri Barber, Jade Walker, all seeing a little bit more increased run after missing time. Cyrus Allen is involved, and he's seeing a little bit more increase in his route running. So it could be any of these guys. I thought it was going to be Walker coming into the season. He did get banged up and missed a game, but again, it's hard to choose just one. If you're going to stack this game, I might have a few lineups with a combination of these wide receivers. Reed is playable naked if you don't want to take the chance on any of them either. So I don't mind that either. Oklahoma at Auburn. This game is almost untouchable now. If you haven't seen the news, all of Oklahoma's wide receivers are out, and one of the running backs is out. So Burks is out, Anthony's out, Gibson's out, Farouk is out, Anderson's out. That leaves kind of like Thompson is the number one, maybe Petaway, maybe. So the one thing, and Hawkins is starting. Let's start with there. Jackson Arnold's not starting this game. Does that mean he's not going to play? Nobody really knows. But Hawkins looked good enough at the end of that Tennessee game, and he seemed to have that connection with Petaway. They had the big play at the end, so maybe there's something there. Petaway could turn into the number one guy here. And then in the backfield, Joe Barnes is probably number one. But again, Tatum is out, so it's just going to be a mix of these three guys, and we just haven't seen it this year. And I know they're favored, but it's on the road. Their wide receiver core is depleted. Wide receiver core is depleted. They're on their, backup quarterback. Whether you think he's better or worse than Jackson Arnold doesn't really. It's like the fact that they're on their backup is just it's kind of a mess. And Auburn, while it's a little bit prettier, isn't much prettier because they had benched Peyton Thorne for Hank Brown, and then last game they brought Thorne back in because of how bad Brown was doing. Thorne came in, played well, seemed to have a connection with Lambert Smith. Cam Coleman is still up in the air, stud freshman, but who really knows at this point? He was banged up, so maybe he starts to get some traction going. But after that, Fairweather and Simmons were the guys when Coleman was out. But Lambert Smith is one of those guys that I never played at Penn State. I don't care for him as a player necessarily, but he did have a ceiling game, so the potential is there. And Jarquez Hunter is a little bit down last week, but he's always got the potential, again, right in that 6,300 price range, though. Just looking ahead to the next game, why wouldn't you find $300 for Devin Neal in a much better game script and, somebody who's going to get more of the workload. So that's a good transition into this TCU Kansas game, maybe the most stackable game on the slate. Hoover is a fair price. Cook is a fair price. These wide receivers are all priced right. Cook is one of the guys in that 6K range is probably priced exactly where he should be. Hoover, if you can afford him, if you're going to game stack this game, doing Hoover with one or two of these receivers is awesome. With this game environment, I don't mind Hoover at all. I don't know that I'll get there in cash, but I mean, he's not considerable in cash. It's just, again, about construction. Cam Cook, typically cash viable with his workload. With pricing on the slate, I don't know that I'll get there, but he's playable in tournaments. And then Jack Beck is a little bit expensive, but I mean, he's been the guy. He's had, he had a ceiling game. I was very happy I had him in my lineup when he did. And then Savion Williams, coming in as potentially wide receiver one. JP Richardson still gets a ton of looks. Eric McAllister, the transfer from Boise, starting to get more snap share. He ran, he was in for the most pass plays of the season last game. His targets have gone up on a week-to-week basis. So it 4,800 for McAllister. The upside's definitely there. Again, spin the wheel, have a few different combinations of these wide receivers with Hoover, and then run it back with this Kansas side. Devin Neal is far too cheap. Luke Grimm has emerged as kind of a wide receiver one, which is weird to say for Kansas because usually like all three of these guys would be 62, 61, and 5,900 last year. And now they're all priced way down, and Grimm is still the clear number one. Arnold at 3,800, I don't hate either just because of that price tag. And he is still involved. If Quentin Skinner could catch the ball, I'd be in on him too. But Neal's really who you're looking at first. Daniels has been a little bit disappointing, but with the way he plays, the upside is there. He just falls into the box twice, and you're just fine. So don't mind that game. This is, like I said, maybe the best game stack on the slate just because of pricing and where the usage is going. Cheap receivers, high usage running back, dual threat quarterback. Hoover does scoot a little bit, not as much as Daniels, obviously, and then cheap wide receivers on this side too. So definitely a stackable game. A game that would be stackable if it wasn't so expensive. The highest team, no, not the highest team total on the slate either. Sorry, Texas. UCF though, with one of the biggest totals on the slate, almost 40 points. Colorado with honestly one of the highest team totals on the slate in a losing effort at 25.5. But Shadur Sanders, just a little too expensive. We'll have to see if Dallin Hayden's going to play. I think he is. But how much do we care with the running backs at Colorado? Augustavi at 3,000. Okay. But we know it's the wide receivers. Travis Hunter, 10.1K. I mean, can you blame DK for putting him up there? He has 50-point upside, and he's been crushing absolutely all season long. Jimmy Horn's kind of fallen off a little bit, but he's still on the field. So that, he could have a ceiling game at any point too. Wester's kind of been like the constant here. 10 to 20 points a game. He's on the field just as much as these other guys, it seems like. But it is Hunter. It's Travis Hunter. The offense runs through him. If you can find a way to stack it with some of these other value plays, I'm not going to stop you. But if you're going to game stack, this other side is expensive too. KJ Jefferson, I cannot touch him at that price. He would need to have a ceiling game in a GPP. You're going to get him at low ownership, I guess. That's what I can tell you. RJ Harvey, this is his team. He should really honestly be more expensive than Ollie Gordon. It's to the point where it's kind of like Ollie Gordon last year. You just find a way to play him. And then Kobe Hudson, Xavier Townsend, both fairly priced, but those are the top two guys. Pittman, the tight end. These guys are just all fairly priced. So if you can find a way to stack this game, honestly do it. But, you're probably going to have one-offs here and there just for the raw points, really with any of these guys. Kind of a boring game. A couple of guys with upside for Louisville. Low team totals on both sides. It could be a little bit more sloggy. Donald Chaney, he's probably going to start, so that's a little bit too cheap for a starting running back against any team. I don't know if Notre Dame's a spot where you click him or not. Tyler Shuck is a little bit too expensive for this matchup, I would think. He could have a ceiling game though, so I'm not going to talk you completely off him. Ja'Cory Brooks is priced up. They did a good job. He could probably be priced up a little bit more. Chris Bell is way too cheap for wide receiver 2. So the targets are going to go to these guys. One thing that you want to watch, though, is Colin Lacey. He's a stud wide receiver from South Alabama, transferred in, hasn't played yet for Louisville. But once he's a go, if he's 100% healthy, he's not going to be min price after his first game. I can almost guarantee that. If he can get, 20 snaps or 20 routes run, get a handful of targets, easily pay off that price tag. That's something we're going to watch right up to lock. Notre Dame side, usual suspects. Riley Leonard, if he can run in a few touchdowns, has the upside. A little bit too expensive, comparatively speaking, to even the quarterback in the next game. Jeremiah Love, still not expensive enough, in my opinion. Again, right in that $6,000 price range, though. So you're going to have some decisions to make. I love Jeremiah Love again. I love this spot for him, but it's going to be tough. And then in the wide receiver core, Jordan Faison is back. And, we saw him last game. He logged significant snaps against Miami. It's going to hurt Chris Mitchell. it could honestly hurt all of these guys, but Bo Collins has still been the guy for Leonard when he does throw. But quite honestly, at this price tag, if you pick the right one, that could be the shipper. So don't love this game very much, but one off here and there. I'm not going to talk you off of. Wisconsin, I am biased being a Minnesota fan, but I'm not touching Wisconsin at all. This is a gross game. They're on their backup quarterback, and Chesmalusi's okay, but he's just a little bit too expensive for the slate, and he's splitting 50-50 with Tally Walker, and Will Pauling is maybe the only guy I would consider at any point just because of his target share. And then on the USC side, I take your pick, honestly. Miller Moss is cheaper than Riley Leonard, so that I like that right there. Miller Moss's upside is there. Woody Marks has been an absolute stud this year. 7,100 is a little bit expensive, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the guys on the slate. But if I'm on my flex and I have 7,100 left, he's not a guy I'm afraid to click even in my cash lineups. Zachariah Branch has kind of emerged as the alpha in this wide receiver room. We kind of always thought he was, but he's kind of showing it a little bit more now at 5K for a wide receiver one. If he's going to get a majority of the target share at that price, it's going to be hard to pass up. Kyron Hudson saw increased usage last game. 4,800 is cheap. Lane, Robinson, Fair all saw increased usage last game. And part of that is due to the fact that McKee went out early, and he's not going to play this game. So that's why Cade Eldridge is on here. Mekhi Lemon is not going to play in this game most likely either. So just any of these guys are considerable. You could stack the USC side only. You don't necessarily need to run it back with anybody. But even if it's a blowout, these are going to be the guys that get them to the point of a blowout. So it's definitely a stackable team, not really a stackable game in my opinion. But if you do run it back with somebody, Pauling would be my top option for sure. And then the reason that Purdue may not be the worst Power 5 team is because of Mississippi State. Blake Shapen is out. Not that it would have mattered a whole lot in this game. Kevon Lee is out. Kevin Coleman, he's a target guy, but he's just a little bit too expensive. If he was like 3,500, I might consider him in this game, but Mississippi State is so bad. We don't even need to spend much time talking about him. Arch Manning, honestly, and don't worry, this says late. It only populates on the late slate because the game is like a 3:45 Lord's time zone or something like that. So it's technically after the cutoff for what we normally see on the main slate, but this is on the main slate. So don't worry about that. But Arch Manning at 9K, too cheap for his upside. Jaden Blue, 7,400, too cheap for his upside, but it's hard to click Jaden Blue when Wisner could get just as much run at 4,500. You're getting an extreme discount for somebody who might see the field just as much, if not more. It's not out of the question that, both of these guys have 2 to 3 touchdowns. It's not out of the question that Arch Manning has 6 touchdowns. Really, honestly, 6 touchdowns is not out of the realm of possibility. Isaiah Bond, far too cheap for wide receiver 1. Golden is too cheap for his wide receiver 2 on this team, and the receiver ahead of him is cheaper. So all formats for Bond, high upside for Golden. Wingo, freshman, has looked great. His upside is definitely there. For the way this season has gone, he's too cheap at 3,700. Really any one of these guys could get there, but Bond, Golden, and Wingo are the top 3 guys we're looking at. Really, honestly, in all formats. But even in these big field GPPs, Jarrett Gibson is not out of the question. Colin Page is out, and obviously CJ Baxter is still out. So we could see Reed Watkins at min price. We could see Ryan Niblett, who's technically a wide receiver on DraftKings, but they're using him as a halfback. So you're not playing those guys necessarily, but we're going to see a lot of faces for Texas. If this holds, and that's a side that you're stacking. So that'll do it for the slate. Obviously this is not a colored slate. This is what it looks like for the SHIPIT Nation members. As you can see, last week Phil Maffa was a cash play. I think that worked out pretty well. Cade Klubnik, high upside, even though he sucks at football. I don't know if you remember last week, but I reverse mushed his game into existence. I'm going to take full credit for that. His ceiling game against North Carolina State, William, this has all the information you need too. What is his projection? What's the ownership we're projecting? Is he cash, high upside, GPP? So, if you want this, just head to SHIPIT Nation. we're ready for you. And we're not doing this to make a ton of money and like bend over DFS players and take their money for our projections, because our projections are better, ownership is better, this or that. Annual all access is $700 for the entire year. That's every single sport. And we also have an optimizer as an option if you want to use it. If you just want to do a single sport, you're getting, just as much value. Football includes college football and NFL. Otherwise, we have our PGA, MLB. We have so many people having success, with the MMA this year so far. NFL started off hot, and PGA goes all year. We're as big a degenerates about the swing season as we are during the normal PGA season. So hop on over to SHIPIT Nation. As you can see, tons of SHIPIT logos at the tops of leaderboards. A lot of big prizes being had out there. Our member Kenny W1732 just qualified for the NASCAR live final. So we're on a roll. It's still early in the season for both NFL and for college football. So the fun is just beginning. And like I said, we're ready to have you in the Discord community. I'll just wrap that up by saying it's the best community out there. It's so much fun being in there with everybody, and we're always looking for more. But the biggest thing you need to remember, rule number one, college football is fun. Enjoy your process, building your lineups. Enjoy the DFS grind. Enjoy the sweat. But most of all, enjoy watching these football games, and enjoy having the ability to play these contests and watch the games on your TV. So we'll go at it from that approach, and let's see some of those SHIPIT Nation logos back at the top of leaderboards. Peace.